he was constantly dealing with the fact that they were. He was trying to
streaming.
Sorry, Corey. Could we pick that up later?
Yeah.
Thank you.
But he was just getting his steam going.
That's okay.
Yep. So we don't have anyone else here yet. Maybe they'll turn up, but we probably should get going.
Yep.
I'll get the notes up here. Thanks, guys, for making it today.
Well, you know.
Well, it means a lot. It is a time commitment, so we appreciate that.
I had nothing else to do except to walk my mom.
Would you guys like a tavern background?
That sounds great.
Since we've got a green screen there.
I prefer more of a coffee shop.
No, I don't have that. So
Tavern is
take it.
just as long as it doesn't
I
have
can
like
put you in
Bud
a
Light
dungeon.
or anything in there.
Do you prefer the dungeon?
The dungeon.
Welcome to the dungeon.
Come on. Where's the notes?
They have an anime where they have 4 characters that are role playing
Right.
and anyways, the role playing is anyways, I guess they say it's one of the most absurd anime comedies that they've ever had. Anyways, it's called Konosuba or something like that. I don't know. Anyways, I don't know. I've never seen it, but it looks pretty hilarious.
Almost got them.
Almost there. Stay on target. Now with multi-shot.
Tolkien.
Have you watched Mahler's critique of The Last Jedi? Have you seen that? No. You need to sit.
Network television.
You guys all want to, especially you, Brian, want to scoot this way a little so you actually have the camera.
Okay.
You guys just a little bit, Brian. You're a little completely off.
Yeah, but you do it all the time, Hawk.
Do what?
He's the off-screen.
The voice.
Voice from beyond.
Don't, Pudgy, don't smoke.
The
Oh.
shadow.
Hawk is the off-screen techno.
Voice of God.
I'm just trying to find my notes. This is really embarrassing.
Do you remember? Do you remember where you parked your notes?
Well, I know where they are, but I'm having a problem with Gmail.
Uh-oh.
It likes to group my emails together in conversations.
So, our channel used to be youtube.com/Tolkien Scholars.
Yeah.
They've now changed it to youtube.com/C/Tolkien Scholars. And my Tolkien Scholars one goes to my Tolkien Moot account, not my channel.
What's the
Even though
C
it's
designator?
C for channel. This is all part of Google wreaking havoc with
Oh, I know
YouTube
why.
channels.
I don't know why.
So,
Sorry, I know what it is now. I need to keep my apps turned off. One moment.
I'll show you guys what the scene is.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Big screen.
Oh no, we have to see ourselves.
There we
You
are.
don't have to, but at least see briefly the
I'm in business.
background.
You're in the business of.
All right, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Brian, if
gavel.
you would, so nobody else here today, huh?
So
Apparently
far.
not.
They do like to show up fashionably late, though.
Yeah, that more than 15 minutes is beyond.
We're so would we know if Jeremiah, for example, is following us, depending on whether we're live?
If we are live,
We're being stalked online.
and
Volunteer.
I mean, I don't know. I
nobody's
sent him.
watching but us.
Okay,
YouTube's really bad about reporting.
right. That's no problem because I
Well, how can I
People have
deny
spring
the
fever.
community, the greatness, my
it is
greatness,
beautiful.
my
out there.
glory?
Well, it's easy. You just say no.
Okay, here we are.
You never call. You never write.
All right, so
Oh, I write. I just never send anything.
Good point.
dear leader,
Yes.
and I mean that with full irony.
Welcome to the Tolkien Society. This is our monthly meeting and broadcast every third Saturday of the month. And today is April 21st, 2018. And we are here in the RPG Research Studio and streaming on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/C/Tolkien Scholars. Used to be just Tolkien Scholars, but now that goes nowhere.
This is the new and improved version.
Yeah. Anyway, TolkienScholars.org is our website. And, somebody's calling upstairs too. Brian, if you want to ask if anybody has topics I want to cover, write those down. And
Absolutely. So what we're going to start doing each month is just to make sure that everyone who's present has the opportunity to kind of request, like, hey, could we touch base on something, or there is a topic that relates to Tolkien's works or something, relative to that they'd like to bring up, and then we can fit it in during that day. So just not to talk about right now, but just to kind of save for the right time. Did you have any comments or any topics, I should say?
Well, there's a YouTube channel called Extra Credit.
Okay.
And I think it was them. They were going over the founders of the genres, and they were saying this guy named
hold on. So
what
question, Richard? Just a second. So, Richard, I'm not trying to silence you. I'm asking, what is the topic that later you want to talk
right,
about?
we'll circle back to.
Yeah, we're going to come back to it.
Precursor authors that inspired Tolkien and the science fiction genre.
Okay.
Fantasy.
Richard.
Science fiction.
Precursor. Cool. Okay, that's on the agenda.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
No.
I won't let it happen again.
Okay. Anybody else?
Corey, do you have anything you wanted to make sure we covered?
I like that.
We're in high def. Brian looks like he has a tattoo on his forehead.
I do.
So that's what
You too shall be branded.
Well, this is the delayed YouTube.
This is
stream.
This is wisdom right here. Okay, so
Is that like the Airbender mark?
yeah, right.
All right, go ahead.
All right, so I would like to ask if we can include after the notes a discussion of the announcement that HarperCollins will be releasing one more work by Christopher Tolkien. So if we can talk about that.
Yeah.
Right. You were emailing about the Fall of Gondolin.
Yep, that's the one. So if we can make time for that.
Which is something that Tolkien, I think. Yeah, we'll talk about.
Yeah, exactly.
So please proceed with
Physician, heal thyself. No, we're all guilty of it.
I stopped myself.
Yes, I stopped myself.
I did after.
Well, another thing we can another thing we can possibly do is, if we have time, we can read on to the very next section of the Silmarillion that Tolkien wrote was on these Valar or angels or gods, depending on how you translate that. But anyway, and we had read about the creation epic. This was 2 months ago. The Ainu Lindale. So that was a good discussion, and so that would furnish us with something more to kind of read. I have a copy. Hawks have a copy. Yes, the Valaquenta. And then so that kind of sets the stage really for the whole first age of Middle Earth and the other stories that he writes. We also can continue on with the next letter, Tolkien, and then anything that then we can go take total rabbit trails to. Should we include the Valaquenta for today, or we don't have a lot of people here? If we have time, we could.
Yeah, we'll just play it by ear.
Okay.
As we usually do.
All right, so we'll just leave that off, and then we'll see how it goes. All right, well, if there's nothing else, then I'll go ahead and read the notes.
Please.
All right, so in the March 2018 notes for the Tolkien Society, I should say it was March 17th, so it was St. Patrick's Day when we last met. And we had Hawk, Brian, Chris, Corey, Richard, Wes, Stephanie, and Andy. We actually had 8 in attendance, which was
and I think this week we have spring fever.
yes. So feast and famine.
4 of us.
We're back to just the 4. So
Yeah.
we're down to 50% of our last
you're-
month's meeting.
If you're feeling overburdened, I can't leave.
No, because then we'll be even less than 50%.
I know, exactly.
Yes. No, don't worry. We're not tossing over the Flotsam and Jetsam yet.
Which am I?
Which is nicer.
I don't know. Am I a floater?
Let's not pursue that line of thinking. Actually, so I heard that there's actually a technical difference between Flotsam and Jetsam. Did you know that? One is cargo, and the other is wreckage.
I do believe this qualifies as a rabbit trail.
Okay. Get that rabbit back in its hole.
Focus. Focus.
So
Back in the hat.
We've
hatch.
finished the attendance. Okay, moving on. Brian read the February notes. Number 2, discussion of last point on physical characteristics of elves of Middle-earth, and Peter Jackson's iteration of the Lord of the Rings. And so we talked about, the salience and stereotypes and appearance. What difference does it make whether they have pointy ears or not? And again, it goes back to the whole idea between a novelist's description and imagination of his world or her world, and how
a
pop
director's
culture,
cut.
and then how pop culture kind of reinterprets that to suit themselves or suit maybe what just most people kind of think of it.
Whimsy.
Yep. So again, there's no direct proof that elves have pointed ears. Discussion of fantasy and horror, even H.P. Lovecraft versus Stephen King and differences. Talking about evil as portrayed in horror movies, and how Tolkien's view of evil is different based on his Christian worldview. Tolkien Society's blog post on re-released Fellowship of the Ring soundtrack and LPs. You could buy these large red LPs and play them on your
The red?
record player.
Sacrilege.
So, with an eye in the middle, it spins around. No.
I am old enough to know what a record is.
I was joking
they've
about
come
the
back.
eye.
They're back in vogue.
Yeah,
Now you can buy USB record players of all kinds. I've got a couple of them.
cool.
Back when I was a young lad, CDs were a thing of the imagination, and you had to load each scene one finger at a time.
Nice. Okay, so there's a link there in the notes to the Fellowship of the Ring soundtrack by Howard Shore on LP and also on CDs and other media. Wes mentioned Signum University. They have a platform called OutSchool. It's called OutSchool, and you can take classes online with Signum University, which is on mythology, and it's got some really interesting things that's worthwhile taking a look there. Wes has been leading a class on The Lord of the Rings. There is a free course on The Hobbit this summer, lectures, so you can look that up on the link. Next, Hawk put classes online for RPG research, classes to certify people in using RPGs in recreational therapy. And much of it is Tolkien based. And so there's a link there to rpgeducation.com. Hope that's the right link, Hawk.
Yep.
Brian made a comment on forms of government. My 5th graders, when given the choice to make a country of their own, looking at monarchy, democracy, representative democracy, etc., and anarchy, they quite a few were really interested in anarchy. Seem to have quite a high view of how anarchy would be great, because then there wouldn't be any competition of who's on top.
And these are clearly people who've never been living on the streets or in a third world country.
Right.
Where there's not the rule of law.
Yes.
These are spoiled little munchkins.
Hey,
So yeah, just kind of the broader.
actually, I thought that was quite interesting.
I think it's probably pretty natural, but sad, because it's the idea of living with all the benefits of the rule of law and not realizing, like, that's not you
Yeah.
can't assume that.
Right.
So, which is why we're studying the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and
Good.
why that's important.
And why they were so critical at
Yeah.
the time
Yeah.
because of all history. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Because most of the kids
Sure.
don't know.
so that whole balance between freedom and restraint, and
Yeah.
how the government has a part to play, but a limited part to play, and
Yeah.
that whole thing. So, really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Since it's and I should say I mentioned as well the need for the heroic in us and how it changes the outlook and character of a role player. And then number 8, since it's St. Patrick's Day, we read all the Irish and Ireland references in the letters of Tolkien, most of which were not as complimentary. But
He was just a tad bit frustrated.
there we go. I think that's a great description, Corey. We would describe him as not being anti-Irish or racist, really, but that he was frustrated because of his love of cultures in general. But he found that what he loved, of course, was a language that has deep structure in it, and he couldn't
Without
really.
any documentation.
Yeah, and
nobody's been able to
Old
unravel.
Irish, yes,
Yeah,
Old
too-
Irish is
too much
very,
mystery for him.
very frustrating. He doesn't like the mystery,
Yeah,
or maybe too much mystery, and
right. It crossed the threshold.
it crossed the threshold for him. Yeah, since he was such a philologist.
Philologist, yeah.
Well, there was nothing you could dig up.
And he asked about whether Tolkien comments on African languages. Not specifically. He was born but not raised in South Africa. But a link on the One Ring forums says, quote, "The SS Guelph carried Mabel and the boys from South Africa at the beginning of April 1895. In Ronald's mind, there would remain no more than a few words of Afrikaans and a faint recollection of a dry, dusty, barren landscape, while Hilary, his brother, was too young even to remember this." Also, another source says there is a letter, number 71, where Tolkien talks about there being something in nativity, a curious sense of reminiscence about any stories of Africa, which always moved me deeply. And then number 10, interest in talking the next month in April. What are his views of African, Slavic, etc. languages? And then number 11, cybersecurity reading from Chris. There was a nod to Tolkien in a techspot.com article on malware, the malware slingshot infecting routers in the Middle East and Africa, and how there were references in the malware to Smeagol and Gollum.
Well, I've discovered that Python, the programming language Python, uses Monty Python references
Right,
for
that's what
functions.
it's all based on.
Very cool. So number 12, Other Minds magazine just released number 18, all Tolkien focused in gaming community, asking questions which lead to research, scholarly material. So it's worthwhile having a look at that. And the issue is available for viewing or download on the link on www.tolkienscholars.org. And it's well
You
worth it.
see, we've got that in our video now.
Very good. And then just the last few points after talking about that a little bit, the Rankin Bass Hobbit film, and how it was fun, and then kind of asking the question, when did each of us encounter stories of Middle Earth? What was kind of the doorway or portal into that? Hawk read letter 147 of Tolkien. We had discussion on it. It referred to the dust jacket of the 3 volumes for the Lord of the Rings. And then Corey read letter 148, which is when Tolkien quibbles over the words and misprints of the first edition of the Lord of the Rings. What's an author's worst nightmare? That he doesn't get published. What's his second nightmare?
And
That he gets
editor.
published, yes, with lots of typos. And then Wes read letter 149 of Tolkien, and there was a discussion of how Tolkien was reviewed, the reviews that came after. So there's this just kind of interesting kind of span from the build up to actually him getting it published, which took so long, and then once it's published, his concern about the dust jacket, the typos, and then finally how people are reviewing him.
I always think of C.S. Lewis's comments on critics, and he says something about the author knows his work in a way that the critics do not, and so there's almost something to be said for Tolkien being kind of irritated at the critics for them not really understanding what they're reading.
It's such a it's
So
a
when
hard
does a
relationship.
critic understand what he's reading?
Well, a critic, if they're doing their job well, may be able to be in a place of influence to say, well, the author is so wrapped up in his own or her own storyline that they've lost touch with what people can think of. So,
Can we add to the list for discussion later a discussion about where we stream?
okay. And then last but not least, after reading letter 149, then we chose to adjourn, and our next meeting will be on the third Saturday of April, even April 21st at Hawk's home. So, and here we are.
Full circle.
Full circle.
I want to, back to old business, I want to make a comment about the elves, about Tolkien's elves.
Okay.
I think that possibly in his mind, he was thinking more of the spiritual glow being more pronounced in an elf than in a human, and that's what differentiated them.
Yeah,
for him.
They did all
So more, a little bit more metaphysical than a physical kind of difference of.
Yeah.
Although they tended to be, he did describe them a little bit.
Well, even though in the
features.
Hobbit, in the third Hobbit movie, we criticize Tauriel and her heat lap of holiness, but still, that kind of gives you a better idea, I think, of what he was thinking.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. Okay, so anything else from stemming from
I'm in the video.
the notes?
Upper right hand corner.
Wait. Oh, yes, right between those two books. Oh, yes. Right next to Tolkien Society, the face of our founder.
Maybe you should do it so that you're peering out of a bookshelf.
They didn't realize we had his head on a stick, and we're just moving it back and forth.
He looks alive, doesn't he? That's like Doctor Who. Or something.
Bernie.
I like to knock. You wish were. I did not obey.
Now we'll get a joystick. Move to the right.
Vacation at Bernie's. Is that what the movie was? Where the guy
Weekend
was
at
the
Bernie's.
dead guy?
Yeah.
Weekend at Bernie's.
Yeah.
It was a
Which
terrible
I
movie, but it
recently
was.
saw-
Didn't they do another
I
one of a
recently
caveman?
saw, I think, a Bollywood version of that. It was such a blatant ripoff. But of course, it had musical interludes.
I love Bollywood movies. Actually,
But it was
Encino
such a
Man.
blatant ripoff.
Wasn't that a ripoff too? Encino Man. It was a caveman who had been frozen.
Encino Man. Yeah, it's a place in California. But, okay, I can't let this go.
Anyway.
So Bollywood.
Yes, you can.
Read or watched two movies that are quite good. I would recommend, unless you really hate subtitles.
No,
But I don't mind
I
those.
just can't multitask.
So these are very much. So in India, you've had lots of like romances. Rich guy falls in love with poor girl. Parents forbid the marriage, and because family's everything,
Romeo and Juliet.
it's all about how do we actually. How does he get the girl and please his parents? So that's kind of a special.
Still honor your parents.
Still honor your parents.
That's
But this
Still
is a
a
very
heavy
different
taste.
kind of movie that they came up with. I've not seen many of these before in Bollywood, being a kind of a musical thing, and that is the kind of epic fantasy. So Bahubali is worth watching. It's on Netflix currently, and it seeks to have that kind of blend of historical and fantastical. Which
So Amazon, if you have Amazon Prime, there's a ton of Bollywood for free. Ton of Bollywood for free. And I've seen some really good ones and some really awful ones.
yes,
There's one that was this total action adventure superhero because it was modern day and he's got a daughter, adopted daughter, whatever. No, it's daughter, and but he is basically the incarnation of
Krishna.
maybe it was one of, but
There's 1,000 to choose from.
I know, but one of the major ones, one of the major days.
Shida.
So, but he goes from India. So his daughter gets kidnapped by a sex slave trade. So it's heavy stuff.
So it's Bollywood
And
does Liam
chases
Neeson.
them through, but it's
Liam
just it's so
Neeson, yeah.
different the way the Bollywood, compared to the Hollywood formula.
I think
They
it's
both have their
starting to
formula.
really, yeah.
It's just very interestingly in their differences, but it's I'll have to pull it up. Anyway,
Yeah.
I do have the Hawk Talk Show for all the tangential stuff. If you'd like to reboot that,
Yes.
we could.
We'll save it
start
for
doing
that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Non-Tolkien stuff. We'd be like, let's do the Hawk Talk Show. So Tolkien Society.
I was gonna say, have we lowered ourselves now?
However,
we're talking about
I
Bollywood.
can redeem this comic stream by tying it in by saying, but is the Lord of the Rings available to read in Hindi?
Probably.
Well, it's
I don't know.
it's about 100. I thought that it came out in like 150 different languages. I was gonna say it's Tolkien's work is one of the few that's been translated more than any other.
So that leads to the question of what languages is Lord of the Rings not available in? So that's a good one for next month.
English?
It depends on whether you think we speak English in America.
Oh, sorry. I misspoke. It's not available in American.
They didn't translate it to the word on the street, thank goodness.
Yo, Sauron!
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's not go down this road. This could be politically incorrect. So.
Black English.
Stop, Richard.
I did not.
Stop
I
now.
did not even bring that up. I was just joking about
Yes,
because
I know.
they have a Bible version, which is kind of a joke.
We're going on the bridge over the River Kwai here. So.
What could possibly go wrong? Russian
Wow.
translation. Hebrew.
All 12.
The Hobbit has been translated into Latin.
Interesting.
I have a copy.
Okay,
So
so
looking at Wikipedia, we
Because it
got
was so
Dutch, Swedish, German,
Oh, there's more than what's probably on there.
Russian,
Hebrew.
Oh, there's so much more I want to know.
The Hobbit's in Latin.
Swedish. Okay. Okay, so
Yeah, sure.
how about if
List
we?
of translations, 38 or 39 languages. Oops. Get that out of the
So yeah,
Basque.
Chinese.
Well, that's an obscure one. Breaktorn.
Well, let's read them
way.
off.
Let's read out loud for our viewers.
Okay, Richard. I mean, I'm whoever.
Basque.
Bulgarian,
Breton.
Catalan, Chinese, simplified and traditional. Croatian,
Croatian,
Czech, Danish, Dutch, Estonian, Finnish, French, Galician,
Yeah, it's in Spain.
German, Greek, Hebrew, Hungarian, Icelandic, Indonesian, Italian, Japanese, Korean, Latvian, Lithuanian,
Ooh, what's that next one?
Marathi,
What's
I don't know
Marathi?
that one. What it could be
Norwegian, Polish, Portuguese, European and Brazilian, Romanian, Russian, Serbian, Slovak, Slovian,
That's a lot of Slavic languages.
Spanish,
there.
Swedish, Thai, Turkish, Ukrainian, Vietnamese.
I don't see any African languages
For
there.
some of these languages, there's a translation.
Wait. Go back for a second.
What?
Down there. In addition to the mentioned above, there are
Oh, The
published
Hobbit.
translations of The Hobbit in Albanian, Arabic, Armenian, Belarusian, Esperanto, Farsi.
Fairways.
And
No, it's Farsi.
and there is one in Latin because I have a copy.
Oh no, you're right. Farsi is spelled different. Georgian, Irish, Lombaxian, Macedonian, and Limburgish. I can't say it. And
Luxembourgish.
Luxembourgish. I apologize. And Persian.
Macedonian.
Right.
Persian.
Huh.
Belarusian.
Is Macedonia? What? How?
Isn't that
Why?
Greek?
Macedonia is to the north of Greece. It's not.
Yes.
Yes,
They have this big fight over like, you can't call yourselves Macedonia because that's where Alexander the Great's father comes from. Philip the Macedon.
Right.
Yeah, I just that's
That seems
translated
random.
yet so many other like India and stuff. You think would be a much larger.
So it doesn't say. It doesn't say Hindi, did it?
Oh, Esperanto
No,
is not really
they're not.
more of a trade language, isn't it?
Persian.
Well, I'm wondering what Marathi or Marathi
Marathi?
is.
Okay. Well, like I said, maybe we can come back to this next month, but I think it's a
Uh,
great thing to consider.
Latin is on that list for the Hobbit.
The Indic language
There
of
we
the
go.
Marathas, spoken by about
60 million people.
Maharashtra. Okay, so it is
So
India.
India.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Cool.
Marathi,
So, well,
So, but it's
not
only
a
one
dialect,
part
it's a
of
spoken
India.
language.
Slang of their own.
Well, yeah, because there's like 5 different
Interesting.
Indian languages.
Indo-Aryan language of the state of Maharashtra.
Well, that's because
So
we've
where's the
taken a
state of
bunch of
Maharashtra?
nations.
Can you
and
look up?
clumped
Can you just
and
maybe
combine them together.
copy and paste the
You don't have to explain
Maharashtra?
it.
So
I
you know
understand.
Yes,
where is
No,
that?
you don't.
The Marathi
No, you don't.
people.
Where?
Maharashtra.
Just wondering map-wise where we are in India.
Nominally Hinduism. Ethnic group. There it is, Maharashtra.
Okay.
Nice picture.
Third.
State of the western region of India.
It's very
It's the
pretty.
Second most populous state, third largest state by area.
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
Do they have
Mumbai. Okay, its
Okay.
capital. Right. So that was old
Do they
Bombay.
have
It's
a
the
map?
world's second most populous subnational
Further down.
entity. over 112 million inhabitants.
Okay, so that would explain.
Yeah.
So
they're
basically, your very populated area, the main language there.
wealthiest state by all major economic parameters and the most industrialized.
Okay, well that would
Okay.
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so if
Latin
there's
should be on that list.
if
dang
there's
it.
no other common, Winnie the Pooh is translated into Latin.
Huh?
I've got a copy of it.
Well,
Winnie the
so
Pooh
is
in
The
Latin.
Hobbit.
Is it?
Yeah, I have a copy at home.
It's kind of a retrograde motion, isn't it? Let's take a.
Uh,
let's
well,
take
there's
a
an
story.
interesting forward in there
never
that
seen that
explains
before.
why you wanted that.
Well, because Esperanto isn't exactly.
Excessive citations. I've not seen that.
That's a quick
before.
thing. Usually there aren't enough.
Yeah.
Citations. Okay, well, to keep things moving
Yes.
for our
Non-audience.
hopeful audience, they watch us when we're all dead and buried in 100 years.
Right.
When you watch this YouTube video, the next thing maybe we can talk about then is the items that people want to discuss. My request would be that we could start with the big news.
Okay. Please.
I will bring that up. So, as of this month, there's quite a few new items to look at. So, really encourage everyone to have a look at TolkienSociety.org. And this came out on the 10th of April. So, we're only 11 days ago. This is hot off the press, or at least lukewarm. And I don't know if, can I show this underneath the camera or not?
I can turn the camera on if you want it to do that.
Or you can pull it up on there if you want to. Or
Yeah, sure. Tell me where. Yeah,
Is
so
it-
from our website,
yeah, will they be able to see?
I can make it. I can share that. so
Yeah,
that we're
and
all-
since we're a member of the, I'm pretty sure we can do
Tolkien
this.
Society.
Tolkien Society, yeah.
we're an official smile.
Smile.
So let me go and add that to.
But seriously though, The Fall of Gondolin will be published in an article by Daniel Helen from the Tolkien Society. He said HarperCollins has announced that it will, for the very first time, publish The Fall of Gondolin on the 30th of August this year. Yeah, it's on the Tolkien Society website, not ours. Yeah.
Well, no.
Oh, you're going through that. I get it. Finding the link. Edited by Christopher Tolkien and illustrated by Alan Lee, The Fall of Gondolin will follow the same format as Beren and Luthien, which came out last year.
I'm not sure which camera you're pointing at.
The one in front of your face. And it's separating out the story so that it stands alone while showing how the narrative evolved over the years. This is the first time that the Tale of the Fall of Gondolin will be published as a standalone edition. Yeah, it's the top one. Collecting all versions of the story together. Responding to the news, Tolkien Society Chair Sean Gunner said, quote, "We never dared to dream that we would see this published. The Fall of Gondolin is, to many in the Tolkien community, the holy grail of Tolkien texts, as one of Tolkien's three great tales, alongside The Children of Húrin and Beren and Luthien. This beautiful story captures the rise and fall of a great elven kingdom." Yeah, it's that illustration there, if we could have that on there. This beautiful story captures the rise and fall of a great elven kingdom taking place millennia before the events of The Lord of the Rings. This book brings all the existing work together in one place to present the story in full, end quote. So it's really his oldest story before the storyline of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings ever
Oh, I
took
did
off.
not know that.
Yeah,
Oh,
actually
yeah.
it began while he was
Yep.
in the trenches in World War One.
The Psalm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, one of the things that's very interesting is,
He's writing on the backs of order paper.
yeah, at that point he could have written his account of the Battle of Somme, but instead he chose to express
Not dwell on
himself,
it.
right, to instead think on something that was above all the chaos and the murder and the mayhem of war, something that was untouched. And so from this he had a kind of a vision of an idea of a hidden city, a kingdom that was encircled by mountains, and that, as it were, was that it was being pursued or looked for, and yet could not be found by its enemies. And so then he started to kind of, from that really kernel of just a couple
So
paragraphs.
what percentage of it made it into the Silmarillion?
Small amount. So that's what this
One of
book
those
will
ones he
show is
nibbled
like,
at for a long time.
yeah, because he did
And
change
it's
the number
scattered
of things.
throughout the history of Middle Earth stuff.
Yep.
Many revisions.
So I was actually wondering if maybe after we talk about the at some point today, could be now or could be after we touch base about the other comments that need to be discussed. I was wondering if we could maybe just read maybe just 2 or 3 paragraphs from the
Sure.
story about
Yeah,
that.
that'd be great.
Okay.
I say yay. What do the others say?
I say yay.
There's some great illustrations in here. Well, it depends. I could read about the beginning, or it could be like when it's actually attacked, which is about the fall of Gondolin. So it's really about a tragedy. What do you guys think? Are you familiar with the story of Gondolin?
I know the broad strokes.
That's the city. It was beach. It was.
The
They
race-
found
He
it.
wrote it into the Lord of
Sauron.
the Rings because,
Right, wasn't-
because the 2 swords that they got in the troll cave
It's
were from
how it was
Gondolin.
led up to its
Good.
betrayal took a long time.
Yes,
But
and
wasn't it
the connection with the Hobbit here.
Wasn't it the dark?
Yep.
Wasn't it the dark elf from the east that
Yep.
came? Can't think of his name right now.
Miglin.
Ended up
England.
entering into the city, and that's really when the whole
Yeah.
thing started. How
Oh, and
Things ended up-
jealousy.
Yes.
Jealousy.
Yeah, it's both. It's 2. It's
There
one
were
is.
many contributing because the dark foe was searching far and wide for them and could not discover them, and slowly he started to see a pattern of traffic and individuals.
And
that
it
he
was
tracking.
Tuor went and sought it out, and he
Yeah,
was
and
let in.
And also the one who had been captured and released.
And then Turin's father,
Yes.
had sought for it, but did not find it. But because he knew where the entrance was somewhere in these mountains, and because of him crying out, looking for it, and not being allowed in, that was kind of the hint that that led. At this point, still Morgoth, isn't it? Who
Morgoth,
is
yes.
Yeah.
seeking, and so he starts to investigate that area which is in Beleriand, which later on is sunken under the waves at the end of the first age. So, well, there's so much more one could say, but this is going to be really exciting. I mean, I almost cried. I'm just being honest with you. When Baron Luthien came out, I said, it's a great love story. It's the greatest romance I think I've seen in literature. I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here, but it is quite amazing, just as good as anything that, say, we might have from Shakespeare or whatever. But I felt like the most haunting of his 3 great tales is, even though Turin is amazing, and Baron Luthien is incredible, the fall of a great and beautiful society. That is, I mean, the fall of Rome,
It wasn't so beautiful.
it wasn't so
It was
beautiful.
great, but it wasn't as far as beyond the facade.
Yes, exactly. Especially when it's an imperialism or something where they were stretched too thin, and you could just see how it could implode. But
Give them bread and games.
yes, but on the other hand, this portrays, in a sense, the desire of the king. Who, this goes back to Richard's comment. So Glamdring and Orcrist were the swords of Gandalf and Thorin that they took from the Trolls cave, right? In the Hobbit. And
Instinct, but that wasn't named.
right, correct. We don't know, but they were all basically made by the High Elves and were swords that had been somehow over the millennia moved, stolen, etc., and then ended up with these trolls. But the one of them was the sword of Turgon, who was the king of Gondolin, and that Glamdring.
Maybe
I'm trying
I
to
think
remember
so.
now.
It was forged in Gondolin.
and Orcrist was also from there.
Yeah.
And so Gandalf took Glamdring, the sword of Turgon, and my theory is that the other sword, the other famous sword that is mentioned in The Hobbit, which I think Tolkien was at that point starting to piece together his mythic landscape. I think that the other one possibly may have been the sword of Glorfindel. That's just my speculation. Anyway, one can go in lots of directions, so we'll keep it on track here. I'm going to read just a short piece here. And at the last, by the power that Ulmo set upon them, they came to the hidden door of Gondolin, and passing down the tunnel, they reached the inner gate, were taken by the guard as prisoners. Then they were led up the mighty ravine of Orfalch Echor, barred by 7 gates, and brought before Ecthelion of the Fountain, the warden of the great gate at the end of the climbing road. And there Tuor cast aside his cloak, and from the arms that he bore from Vinyamar, it was seen that he was in truth one sent by Ulmo. Then Tuor looked down upon the fair vale of Tumladen, set as a green jewel amid the encircling hills, and he saw far off upon the rocky height of Eman Gwareth Gondolin the Great, city of 7 names, whose fame and glory is mightiest in song of all dwellings of the elves in the hither lands. At the bidding of Ecthelion, trumpets were blown on the towers of the great gate, and they echoed in the hills. And far off but clear there came a sound of answering trumpets, blown upon the white walls of the city, flushed with the rose of dawn upon the plain. This is a picture of, this is from Ted Nasmith. And he, this is...
that's not running. You face it to that camera.
Okay. An illustration of Ulmo speaking to... Ulmo speaking to Tuor, giving him the helm of Dor Lomin, which was an artifact.
The god of the sea.
Right, and that's a connection with the Valar, which is earlier described in the Silmarillion. So he was sent to then go, because I believe Ulmo had a foreboding that Gondolin would be attacked.
Yeah.
And so he
sent it through dreams, through the rivers and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And so Tuor basically becomes, he's an embedded rescuer or savior, where he goes, he's not allowed to leave, so he stays in Gondolin, he marries the king's daughter, and then when Morgoth finally does learn, years later, where they are, at that point Tuor and Idril Celebrimbor, the princess, have had a son who is Arundel. Arundel, the mariner. Earendil. Earendil, the mariner. Yes.
Oh boy. And so we now know how painted geek he is.
Oh yes, this was a gift from my friend Katie, and I am very thankful
show
for
that
it.
to the camera, because that actually didn't show on the camera.
Yes, this is
You
definitely
can just
very
scan.
geeky. So, Arundel.
Hang on a second, I gotta move the other image out of the way. Hang on.
I'm not sure he would ever play football.
Baseball. Yeah.
Baseball, whatever.
There we go. Yes,
Arundel.
Yep, and then the front.
The Mariners. So.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool.
All right.
Oh,
So
boy.
that's a little piece there, but it's worth reading. It's a tragic story, and I'm looking forward to seeing what Christopher Tolkien does as he brings all these little pieces together from kind of first little snippets in the trenches of World War I up to the last version.
Well, wasn't at least the way it was described in the Silmarillion, wasn't the reason why they were hidden, though, was because essentially, if they weren't hidden, well, they had kind of withdrawn from the fight with Sauron at the time,
Yes.
and and there were people, the Sons of Fëanor were still trying to keep up the war on Sauron, but
To
it
get
was
the
getting,
Silmarils back.
I mean, not the Sauron, sorry, Morgoth.
Yep.
And they were having a lot of problems, and actually a lot of the
war-
military strength of the elves had diminished to such an extent by the time that they had discovered Gondolin, because Gondolin I think then they come forth and finally end up fighting with Morgoth, but
Yes.
it took them a lot longer to
respond.
than they should have.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it's very sympathetic. How do you respond? Do you retreat and seek to preserve? In a sense, you see that mirrored in the Lord of the Rings in Galadriel, and what they try to do in her little kingdom.
Right.
But it's a hard thing because ultimately you can't keep the world out and the evil that's there. But it certainly seems better than what Feanor's sons do in their War of the Jewels.
Right. Well, but there's this kind of thing, where they're kind of trapped between a rock and a hard place because they exiled themselves by leaving Amon, and so they're kind of stuck in a war with Morgoth, whether they want to or not, because what the Fëanor, they want to attack. They made an oath, but the people who didn't make an oath but still cross the sea, they still have to deal with Morgoth on a regular basis.
What's her name? The Lady of the Wood. Galadriel. She took the oath.
No, she didn't.
Yeah,
You
she
mean
did.
the oath of the kinslaying?
Yeah,
Did
Yeah.
she?
that's
Yeah.
why she was in Middle Earth.
I thought.
And why she wouldn't go back because she felt so guilty.
Yeah.
She didn't directly she didn't take part in the
Actual-
raising of the
Right.
I'm
the
almost
ships or any of that, but
When
I'm almost
Feanor
certain
said,
that Feanor had certain people that did commit to the oath, and then there were others that did not commit to the oath but followed him anyways.
yeah, I think it was more that she followed.
I don't. She followed, but she
I don't
didn't
think
commit
she
to the
swore-
oath
She didn't swear the oath away.
because
only the sons of Feanor.
oh yes,
swore
oh
to
yes,
the oath.
correct.
because
the rest
only the
followed.
Feanor went nuts
Yes.
because they couldn't
Well,
fulfill
because-
their
exactly,
their
because
Only
that
the sons-
became-
only
that
the
be-
sons took
Right.
the oath.
Right.
and they
Everybody
died a
else
very
just
sad
followed.
death.
And
And then
that
she
drove
felt
apart.
guilty for having done so because
Right.
of the ships being burned and
I was thinking rather of when Mandos, and this is really good because it leads into the Valar anyway, because we talked about Ulmo, but then you have the, as it were, the god or the power. I think is even a better translation here, the power of the sea, and then you have Mandos, who's kind of like the power, capital P, over death, and so he's the keeper of that.
He's kind of I don't know. He's more of a watch person than he really is.
He's not a Hades.
He's not like the dictator of the dead. He's just kind of like
Well,
the overseer. He just
His
kind of keeps an
function,
eye on.
his function is to oversee the person until they're ready to be reincarnated, as I remember it.
For the elves, anyway.
For the
not
elves.
men.
Right.
But it seems like judge as well, right? That he has this role of, because he warns them, and this is going back to Galadriel and what we were talking about. They're on the shores of Aman. They're going north, and after having been abandoned. This is after Feanor has abandoned them. He took the ships. He burned.
so then they have to go over the grinding.
They have to go over the
ice,
grinding ice.
Helcaraxe.
They can't go back because they've already left. But there's a point where Mandos basically says,
Look,
don't
they gave
go any
him,
further.
They gave him a chance right at the edge of the Helcaraxe.
but because of the kinslaying, they already felt like, well,
Exactly,
we no
they
longer
couldn't-
can go back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then also, even after they exiled themselves to Middle Earth, they were still told, no, you can come back, and Galadriel wouldn't do it because she felt too guilty.
Well, Mandos and Manwë were connected to Iluvatar in a way that some of the others were not, because
Yeah.
in some ways Mandos's comments were very cryptic, but they were usually, I felt, passed down to them from Iluvatar. It wasn't usually Mandos dictating something, saying, "Oh, you're going to choose something."
No,
I think it was more like he was just aware of certain things that were going on that the others did not, and that was his comments that were made on a regular basis. And the same way with Manwë, they were both aware of things that just were very different than their brothers and their sisters, the rest of the Valar.
Yeah, this is all great, guys. I think that's why I think it'd be worthwhile to at least read part of the Valaquenta and then just kind of break it up and maybe talk about it as we go. We could always continue it. We don't have to do it all in one fell swoop. But we've already referenced like 3 or 4 of the Valar.
I don't know. Once you start, you can't stop.
They like potato chips. Right?
So if I can summarize what you're saying, it sounds like, Corey, so discussions about the Oath of Feanor and the elves that followed, and really about Turgon's decision to retreat from the war against Morgoth by building his hidden city.
Right.
Correct?
Well, the problem they faced was the Gondolin was more geared for not being found than it was for being defended.
Yeah.
So once they got found, it was
Yeah, because when you've got a hidden city, you're not preparing as much for siege.
Well, in the
and all.
security world, obfuscation is considered the lowest form of security.
Interesting. Okay, well,
Poorest.
I want to make sure that we follow up with other comments, and then maybe we can come back to the Vala Quenta.
Great.
So, Richard, you wanted to talk about precursor authors?
I kind of like to, but I don't remember all that much about it, so I basically got to go back and review it. But there's this channel called Extra Credit, and they do discussions on complex topics, but they also do cartoon illustrations to sort of make it more accessible by other people. And they've started a new series called Sci-Fi, where they're discussing the origins of science fiction. And the recent one was on Lord Dunsany?
Dunstan.
Dunstan. And
No, I just know who he's referring to.
Okay, cool. I'm glad you.
It's kind of a weird
I
name.
can't remember it. Apparently he was some weird ass, or not, some noble who didn't sit around and do anything, like people accuse me of doing.
And he didn't even have good coffee back then, So
Yeah, I know.
Otherwise, he could have sat around a coffee shop.
I know.
It's all wasted.
It is.
The money's wasted on the rich.
Yeah, it's just terrible waste.
So, yeah, sci-fi.
Yeah, so their main focus is on gaming things, but the sci-fi thing is they're talking about the origins of science fiction.
That's really cool. And
Hey,
could
guys
you refer to
pause
that?
For just a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just hold it. I got to restart the stream. Be right back. Just have a little technical glitch. I want to see if stopping and starting will fix. Yeah. Hold that thought and pose.